Hello all, welcome to the Mughals to Mahatma series of Convert IAS. The theme of this video is British Imperialism and its success. Now you can study history in two ways. First, you can mug up the facts. You can make a timeline, you can find the chronology and you can put facts along with that and you can mug up the facts. That's one way to study history. Second is to study history in its context. Now when you study history in the first way, if a question is tweaked and if a question demands conceptual clarity or logic from you, then you won't be able to find the answer. That's why maybe many people say that studying history is hard or history is full of facts. But when you study it in context, even when you don't know all the facts, you will be able to attempt questions. So the approach we are following in this series is to present history in its context. Take a question that UPSC has asked in the past. What is the similarity in the approaches of Marx and Gandhi? Now this can be a polity question as well as a history question, a modern history or a world history question, because it deals with historical personalities. Now if you have studied these personalities in their context, you can answer this question. Otherwise it's very difficult to answer questions like this. This is applicable for both prelims and mains. Now keeping this introduction in mind, let's move to this video. Now see the concept British imperialism and its success. It has a technical term, imperialism. Now imperialism is one term that we all take for granted. We just take it for domination. But this is a technical concept. It has a meaning in political theory. And naturally this political theory gets transcended to history as well. So in this series, in this video as well, in this series as a whole, we are going to discuss concepts in depth so that you have the proper clarity. Let's see what imperialism is. Now this will help you for world history, this will help you for ethics, and this is going to help you if you have political science optional or for polity in general. Now see, imperialism is a concept where two nations are involved. One nation extends its power over other countries or people. That is imperialism. It's extension of power. Now how do you extend your power? First, territorial expansion. So when China is trying to claim Arunachal or Taiwan, China is acting as an imperial power. Second is economic control. So take the case of Britain in India during the 18th century. They are controlling India with something called the permanent settlement system. The Indian farmers are being controlled like that. So that is also part of imperialism. That is economic imperialism. Then hard power can be used. So when Robert Clive defeats the Nawab of Bengal in 1757, hard power is used. Now soft power is also there. When Britain comes up with theories like Oriental despotism, I'll explain that after this in this video itself. So these theories are used to control soft power. Or take the case of westernization. This is one concept you will study in society. So westernization is a soft power tool. So using soft power as well, you can do imperialism. So imperialism has various facets. This is the definition of it. And all of these definitions is applicable for Britain in India. That is why we call it British imperialism. So what about colonialism? What is colonialism then? If what Britain did was imperialism, what is colonialism? Colonialism is a mode of extending imperial power. I've told you four facets of it. Colonialism brings everything together. It is a form of imperialism that was established in the world by European powers from 15th century to 20th century. And after 20th century, colonialism is not possible. So what Israel is doing in Palestine is compared as colonialism by some historians. They call it settler colonialism. You go to a place, you settle there, then you colonize. So what Britain did to India was also settler colonialism because they came here, they settled here, and they controlled the territory. So in colonialism, you have an imperial power. Take the case of UK. They have a major country there, but they will have colonies at different places. In these colonies, they have something called monopoly. So entire trade, entire resources of this colony will be controlled by the imperial power. So Britain had colony in India, in Sri Lanka, in Egypt, in US, and different parts of the world. So this is how colonization works. So understand that colonization is an extension or a sub-strategy of imperialism. I've already told you that colonialism happened in the world from 15th century to 20th century. And we have a stats here. It's a good stat that you can quote in various answers. By 1800, only 35% of the earth was covered as colonies by the European powers. But during the beginning of First World War, that is 1914, the coverage of the world was 84%. So 84% of the world's territories were controlled by imperial powers. And 84% of the world was kept as colonies. That is why even the present world is divided as first world and second world, because everything that is happening in the current times has an implication on colonies. And this is the reason. Now see, how come colonialism happened all of a sudden? There are three stages behind that. These three stages of colonialism is important because when you study India's history, these three stages is important to understand it in context. Otherwise, as I said in the beginning, you'll just have to mug up the facts. Now you have to understand that the political order in the world before 15th century was feudal. That means land was the major source of revenue and whoever had land had the power. Feudalism was replaced with capitalism. So land is moving and giving its way to capital. Capital means money. So owning land is not a symbol of power. You need to have capital, money. And this system has three stages. The first stage is called mercantilism. Mercantilism means, imagine there are two countries, India and China. India is exporting stuff to China and India is importing stuff from China. If India's imports from China is greater than its exports, then China will have a better trade balance. So what will happen as a result of better trade balance? More money will be going out of India to China. So mercantilism is a strategy where you do this purposefully. You deliberately make a current account surplus. You do trade with where you maximize your exports. You sometimes do monopoly itself and you get maximum advantage of it. You get the precious metal. At that time, the money was called as bullion. Bullion means gold, silver. So you get maximum bullion out of trade. That's mercantilism. Now you connect it with British imperialism. Why did they came to India? They came to India as traders. So the idea was to maximize trade, to get the maximum surplus. But India had a different story because India was self-sufficient. So we didn't need stuff from them. Rather, our stuff was in demand there. So they took things from here and they had to supply huge bullion to India. And India was known as the sink of precious metals at that time. So see, mercantilism is not working with India. And that's why they think of conquering India. Because India was a sink of precious metals. Now this is the first stage. What happens in the second stage? They'll conquer India. Then what will happen? They will take raw materials from here. Then what they do? They have factories set up in Manchester and in other parts of UK. They'll process the goods there and they'll sell the finished goods in India. So this is the drain theory proposed by Dadabhai Naoroji. This mechanism where industries are used to loot the wealth is called industrial capitalism. This is why even today we face the issue of missing middle. That means we don't have a manufacturing sector because we had a systematic deindustrialization process that took place during the colonial time. And we need industries for jobs because this is a labor intensive sector. Still, India is a service driven economy. That's why we have labor shortage. So after mercantilism, they did industrial capitalism. So this is a process that is happening all around the world. Keep that in mind. And final stage is financial capitalism. Here I'll give you one example. Imagine the Suez Canal. Suez Canal is part of Egypt. It's in the territory of Egypt. To construct the Suez Canal, Egypt doesn't have enough money. So who will give the money? France, Britain, they'll give the money. So they're financing the project. Now, once you finance the project, what will happen? You will have to repay the money back. If Egypt doesn't have the capacity to repay it, what will you do? You will annex this territory. This is what is called financial capitalism. The same thing that is happening in modern times called as debt trap diplomacy. So these are the stages of capitalism. We are at the stage of financial capitalism now. So these two stages are relevant for us in the context of modern history. Now look at this map. Keep everything that I told you in mind. We'll re-invoke that once you discuss this map. See this map? This is the map of the world in 15th century, before this mercantile capitalism begins. See the trade routes. From China, you have the Silk Route going. There are two ways to reach India here. One is through the Suez Canal. Suez Canal was not constructed then. This is the Suez Canal. Second is through the Cape of Good Hope. That was also not discovered. That was discovered by Vasco da Gama in 1498. Before that, it was not discovered. So what will you do? You need goods from India. India is rich in spices, silk, cotton. We have discussed it in the previous class. So you need goods from India. So how do you buy it? You buy it from the Arab traders because they have connection with India. But when they sell it, they take a commission, and it is up to 10 times. So the Europeans, now you apply the concept of mercantile capitalism. Is mercantilism possible here? No, because they are in trade deficit. So they have to find a way out. That's when expeditions are commissioned by kings. And a king called King Manuel is the Portuguese king who commissioned Vasco da Gama to India. Once Vasco da Gama reached here, the first fort by any European power in India is named after this king. It's called Manuel Fort. It's in Cochin, Kerala, because Vasco da Gama came to the Kerala coast. Now, once Portuguese came, for almost 100 years, Portugal and Spain had the monopoly. See this year? This year is important, 1588. This is the year in which the Spanish Armada was defeated. That means the Spanish king was defeated or the Spanish power lost its supremacy. 1588, the monopoly of Spain and Portugal was lost in global trade. And you see what is going to happen. In 1600, the English East India Company is found. So English East India Company is a private company. It was found by a group of merchants. And they were given something called the Queen's Charter. This charter means that they have exclusive monopoly rights over trade with the Orient. Orient means East. So what is the East of Britain? That is Indian subcontinent. So once they got this, they started sending people to the Indian court. So 1600 is a time when Akbar is still alive. Akbar dies in 1605. So in the court of Jahangir, who is Akbar's son, these people come. William Hawkins. Then after that, Thomas Roy will come. They ask for rights. They fail. They get minimal rights. But a significant breakthrough comes in the form of Golden Firman. This is one very important event and one very important year that you have to remember. Golden Firman was given in the year 1632. It was not given by the Mughals. It was given by the Sultan of Golconda. So they got some privileges. So by this time, Portuguese already had proper trade ties with India. Goa was there in their control. Even the Dutch came to India that time. But the British is coming late. But they come with a lot of power. So Golden Firman, they got some rights. Farrukhsiyar gives another firman. This happens in 1717. So even Aurangzeb will give some privileges. So Aurangzeb dies in 1707. Before that, he gives some privileges to the British. He in fact fights a war with the British as well, in which the British loses. So these are three different things. But relevant concessions were given in the form of Golden Firman and Farrukhsiyar's Firman. And in Farrukhsiyar's Firman, they get something called the Dastak, which means a right to issue trade passes. So slowly they are expanding. Now, when you do this, when you're trying to conquer or when you're doing mercantile capitalism, you always need a philosophy to support that. Otherwise, how are you going to convince the people in your country? Or how are you going to conquer the other countries? For this, they had a philosophy. This philosophy is very important, and yet there are two people associated with that as well. This philosophy is called Orientalism. Orientalism means people in the Orient. So I'll just, without going deep into it, I'll just tell you what Orientalism is. Orientalism is the understanding of the Westerners about the Orient. It is often biased, inaccurate, and stereotyped. Okay, just keep that in mind. There are two major thinkers who contributed to Orientalism. One is J.S. Mill, someone who will study in ethics. Second is V.A. Smith, John Stuart Mill, and Vincent Adam Smith. J.S. Mill wrote the book History of British India. It can come as a match the following. V.A. Smith wrote the book The Early History of India. In both these books, they support the idea of Orientalism. I'll explain that in the next slide. The basic thing behind this is civilization mission. Now, what exactly is it? See, the way they explained India or Indian subcontinent is with a concept called Oriental despotism. So they argued that Indian history is changeless. Indian history is changeless or static. The only thing that changes is despots. Despot means kings. Despotic kings. So the history is changeless. It is circulating. It is just the same things repeating, but kings will change. This is the idea of Oriental despotism. Now, in a society like this, in a society that is backward without Oriental despotism, you have to give something. What is that? Democratic spirit or civilization. So whose burden is it to civilize the Orient? It is the white man's burden. This is the white man's burden theory. So this is the philosophical base of the British imperialism. They come here with this and these two names, J.S. Mill, V.S. Smith, these are the people who contributed to it. Now there has been counter narrative to this. When the nationalist historians write India's history during the nationalist phase, this is the narrative that they are trying to counter. This narrative is called as colonial historiography by the nationalists. Even when we study in textbooks right now, we study it as colonial historiography. But they called it Orientalism. Now, nationalist historians countered this by talking about the golden past of India, invoking the Guptas, Cholas and all. Now, keeping everything in mind, you imagine a mains question or a prelims question for that matter. Was British imperialism in India accident or intentional? You can try writing this question in Convert itself. You can consider this a world history question or a modern history question. Was British imperialism in India accidental or intentional? The actual answer to this question comes with the concepts that I explained before. They came to India as mercantilists. But they found that India was a sink of precious metals. We cannot have trade advantage, so what do? We conquer the territory. We get the Diwani and Nizamat rights. Then what do? We take the revenue from India and use the same revenue to buy goods from India and then take it out of India. This is the strategy they imposed. So it is no accident. They came with clear intention. But that was mercantilism. That again is imperialism itself. So we cannot say that they came here as mere traders, because trade was a political strategy, which is part of imperialism. Now, as I told you, Indian revenue was used for buying goods and Indian revenue was used for stationing their troops as well. This is the Subsidiary Alliance, where they stationed British troops and British residents with the Indian wealth. Now, there is a chronology for British imperialism in the world itself. Now, see, it starts with 16th century conquest of Ireland. Britain is a country that conquered Ireland in the 16th century. So we cannot say that they were a power who were concentrated only in trade at that time. They are a power who are imperialist, who are conquering even in the 16th century itself. But in 16th century, the Mughals were at the peak of the power in India. During that time, they cannot even imagine attacking India, because the Mughals were a formidable force and their navy was not that developed. So they came to India as traders because India had consolidated powers at that time. Now you see there are two stages of colonialism. First is the First Empire and second is the Second Empire. The First Empire deals with Christopher Columbus finding America and colonizing North America and Caribbean. This ended with the American Revolution, with the 1783 Treaty of Paris. Once this came to an end, they started focusing on the Orient. Here you have Australia, Sri Lanka, Egypt. So India was found by the Portuguese already. Britain just had to conquer it from other powers. From 1740 to 1760s, they fought the Carnatic Wars in India with the French. So they had to fight with other powers to get control over India, but India was already found. So it is in the Second Empire time that Britain is conquering India. Now chronology is there with respect to India itself. Now, when exactly did the British control in India starts? Is it the Carnatic Wars in 1740s where they defeated the French? Is it the Battle of Plassey in 1757 when they had the first military victory? Or is it the 1761 Third Battle of Panipat where Marathas were defeated by Ahmad Shah Abdali? Because Marathas were a formidable force. They were likely to replace the Mughals. So was it then? Or was it during the Buxar when they signed the Treaty of Allahabad and got the Diwani and Nizamat right? Now all these can be correct. In history, you don't have a specific event. A specific event will be an artificial break. All these are correct. All these are together, can be taken as the reason together, and you can say that it is in 18th century that the British is consolidating their power. To be more accurate, you can say that the second half of 18th century. So when you start a mains answer, you can give this perspective. Now, why did they succeed? There are four major reasons for that. Now, what you see here is called a musket. What you see here is the cannon. Muskets were already there in India. Babur came to India with gunpowder technology was there in India, but British muskets were more accurate and they had more firing range, and they were trained in that. So during this time, the Indian soldiers and the Indian princely states in fact imported European arms, but they didn't have originality and they didn't have the necessary training to use them as well. So the British always had a superiority when it comes to artillery. Second, the nature of their forces. It was disciplined and they had a fair selection process. Now, how were people selected to the Indian princely states? If you remember the Bhima Koregaon incident, Bhima Koregaon is an incident where you have a famous memorial of the Bhima Koregaon battle in which the Mahars fought for the British. And this army, the British army where Mahars fought, that defeated the Peshwa army of Marathas. And this is one side the Ambedkar visited. Every year, January 1, there is an event that is going on there. So in Indian army, lower caste people were not selected in the armies of the princely states. But British recruited them because they followed the process of fair selection. Indians were discriminated based on racism. They couldn't rise beyond the ranks of Subedar. But when it comes to recruitment from Europe, or for that matter from India, the process was comparatively fair. And they were trained with discipline. And they were paid with regular salary. For all these reasons, their army was better than the Indian princely states. So it is during the Carnatic War, the Nawab of Carnatic was defeated by Dupleix. Dupleix is the French general. And Dupleix defeated the Indian princely state army of thousands with just a small army. It is then they realized that even a small disciplined army is enough to defeat a big state. And then they continued this trend. Later they recruited sepoys as well. So this army is the second reason. Third is quarreling states within India. So after the decline of Mughals since 1707, you have a series of polities in India. You have the Sikhs, you have the Jats, you have the Rajputs, the Marathas, the Nawab of Bengal, Awadh, Hyderabad. Then series of other kings, Travancore, Carnatic, Mysore, all of them are fighting each other. So what the British did, so this practice was started by Dupleix again. He started interfering in the internal affairs. He started forming alliances with one king against the other, and the British continued this. Then they came up with a strategy called Subsidiary Alliance. So here I have used the term diplomacy. Subsidiary Alliance is an example of that. Subsidiary Alliance is when British will troop a resident and their army there, so that that army will protect them from any other external invasion. In fact, this was done during the time of Wellesley, and they came up with Subsidiary Alliance to protect themselves against Russia and France. For Indian rulers, it was a measure against counter other kings, but for Britain, it was a measure against Russia and France, because Napoleon was having his conquest at that time. So Napoleon was likely to invade India at that time. So the British had Subsidiary Alliance in this context. This is a UPSC previous year question about Napoleonic conquest and Subsidiary Alliance. So keep this in mind. Now, artillery, disciplined force, quarreling kings, superior diplomacy, finally leadership. The person whom you see here is Robert Clive. Robert Clive, with an army of just 210 men, conquered Trichinopoli. which is the capital of Karnataka at that time. Now that was the capability that these people had. These are first line leaders. Then they had second line leaders like Airakute. He is the person who defeated Kote di Lali in the third battle of Karnataka. Then you have people like Arthur Wellesley. This again, Arthur Wellesley is a UPSC previous year question. He is the one who defeated Tipu Sultan in the third battle of Mysore. So you have first line leaders and second line leaders. In India, we had first line leaders. For example, we had Hyder Ali, we had Tipu Sultan, we had Maratha generals like Madhav Rao, the Holkar Scindias, but second line leadership was lacking. They had able leadership at both levels. So for all these reasons, the British succeeded in India, and you can say any of these events can be seen as a break year, or all of this can be taken together. So that explains the history of British imperialism in India. I hope the concepts as well as the facts and events is clear to you by this time. In the next video, we'll come up with yet another theme. Thank you for listening.